Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Dan Sampaio and I'm delighted to open today's Mondac webinar in association with Nextime, which will analyse the importance of cross-functional interactions and the benefits one can draw from customising processes and technology to suit organisations' needs. Your host today is Mark Lessam. Mark is a Senior Executive Director with Nextime. He is an accomplished business executive with more than 30 years of diverse experience across multiple industries. He has held senior management roles in general management, operations, marketing, sales, and finance. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to the entire team at Mondac for making this possible. And thank you all for joining us. We're pleased today to help deliver an engaging discussion on contract management and the importance of cross-functional collaboration. We do recognize that your time is valuable, and it's our aim to conclude this session in 45 to 60 minutes. I'd like to take a moment to just comment and welcome our distinguished panel, each of whom I'll introduce in greater detail in just a moment. From DHL, we have Maria Tsigornis. From Johnson & Johnson, Michael Beckstead. And from Nextime, Kirk Sampson. Now, I'm going to begin the broadcast with a brief contextual overview of today's topic, and then I'm going to moderate our expert panel discussion. Now, as the automated response said, you are in the listen-only mode, and if you have any questions, please do share them with us through the question box, the chat box on the control panel, and we're going to address those questions toward the end of the session or in writing if time doesn't permit us to cover them during the broadcast. So let's go ahead and get started with today's overview. Savvy business leaders have long realized the importance of fostering a collaborative culture to ensure that business units aren't working in isolation. Now, this is especially critical in the contracting process. Agreements cannot be drafted, negotiated, and/or managed in isolation by one organizational function, as doing so is likely going to expose the company to unintended risks and limit the effectiveness of the agreement. Now, interaction between cross-functional stakeholders can unlock numerous benefits, from spurring enterprise agility to reducing compliance risks to improving working capital metrics. Now, more than ever, business, procurement, and legal teams are thinking beyond their traditional functional silos to properly evaluate the enterprise-wide impact of their contracting efforts. Today, we will address how to encourage the balance between the respective contracting wants and needs of both legal and business stakeholders. Now, frequently, the business unit perspective is that the legal team is an impediment to getting things done quickly, often pumping the brakes to pending growth, which puts meeting business goals at risk. Now, obviously, this is not a very fair evaluation, but it's fueled by the necessary and specialized work that attorneys in the areas of intellectual property or compliance, as examples, that they perform to draft an agreement. Now, to the business stakeholders, this work can often seem arduous, time-consuming, and/or complex. Conversely, legal teams might not fully understand the business purposes of a contract if they're not looped into if they're not looped into the negotiations or aware of the dynamics of the served market. Why does the procurement want this now, and for what meaningful purpose, they might ask? Or they might be alarmed to learn that the risks that the business units have taken on without initializing cross-functional coordination. So both sides can be equally frustrated with one another if they're not working in tandem. Now, in such situations, likely mistakes in the contract negotiation process may cost time, money, or both. It seems clear that working together would help to minimize this friction, but it wasn't always technically feasible. However, with new technology, this collaboration is substantially easier. So cross-functional gaps can cause revenue leakage, frustration among the teams, and ambiguity in contracting language. This can delay the negotiation and execution process as people hunt down answers and explanations from diverse stakeholders. Clearly, it's in the company's best interests to have everyone on the same page and to identify and address any conflicting perspectives prior to engaging in negotiations. Using a comprehensive contract management system helps to clarify and unify agreement processes for the company and limits the space for third parties to create confusion or exploit any internal divisions. These systems also give companies a single source of truth for negotiation histories and business relations with vendors. This helps to ensure that any exceptions or unique clauses that are transparent and that they're easy to track over the lifetime of the relationship. So having the right teams at the table in the contracting process is obviously crucial. In addition to legal, risk management, compliance, HR, ESG, and other business units might have equity or crucial insights into how the final agreement needs to read. Each functional area has valid input intended to be best protect and empower the business. Every industry is going to have a different list as to who should have an opportunity to collaborate on the entire contracting process. But the key is to be inclusive without losing the ability to be agile and responsive to the business needs. So how do you strike the right balance? What technology is available to facilitate collaboration, to standardize positions, and to speed up the negotiation process? Modern contracting platforms and systems make it easy for all stakeholders to naturally and efficiently access contracting information, track negotiations, and participate in the process. Contract management tools are now available that can free up thousands of hours of staff time, freeing them to focus on higher value tasks. And thankfully, newer technology also makes it easier to facilitate cross-functional participation on a global scale. Their use of web-based storage, easy-to-use contracting platforms, chatbots, artificial intelligence, and electronic signatures enable cross-functional teams to easily collaborate in real time, around the globe, and on a shared platform. So today, we're going to talk to our expert panel about what they've experienced in working with contract management systems. We hope to learn some best practices, as well as some challenges that they've faced in being early adopters to contracting technology. It's my privilege now to introduce our panelists. Maria Tsigornis leads the commercial contract management and legal operations team at DHL Supply Chain for the Americas. She's responsible for negotiating customer-facing agreements, as well as developing tools and processes and implementing systems to aid the entire legal function. Additionally, she has taken on a role to align contracting processes globally. I'd like to welcome Maria to the panel. Michael Beckstead leads the team responsible for delivering supplier contracting services for the procurement organization in North America at Johnson & Johnson. Prior to this role, Michael was a senior HR leader, leading the talent acquisition team responsible for recruiting within the R&D and engineering functional spaces throughout North America. And we'd like to welcome Michael to the panel today as well. Finally, Kirk Sampson is an experienced legal and business strategist with proven success managing in volatile, high-paced, high-stakes environments. He's an attorney in good standing with both Illinois and Wisconsin, and a former US diplomat. His key competencies include contracts and negotiation, organizational change and strategy, and program and people management. Welcome, Kirk. And with the introductions out of the way, let's just go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to address my first question to both Maria and Michael, and I'll invite you to answer in that order. Maria, could you tell us a little bit about your growth journey from where you started to where you are today as a contracting organization at DHL?
Sure, and thanks for having me. So as you mentioned, I head up our contracting function at DHL Supply Chain in the Americas. So for those of you that don't know, DHL Supply Chain runs warehouses. We do transportation for a variety of customers across the globe. So our journey started way back almost 25 years ago. Our function was started in around 1997. It was one person. We started reporting to the CFO, and really the the crux of what we were trying to do is look at agreements holistically. We have a lot of different stakeholders within our organization that need to be involved, but there was no one team really looking at it and pulling everything together. So this is a great topic for us because this is really where we started. And we've grown since then. We now have about 18 CCMs, what we call it, commercial contract managers within the Americas, and supporting a variety of different documents and customers. And we really had a kind of a flip in our approach, maybe 5 years, 10 years into it. We were, as you mentioned, right, legal is sometimes seen as like the blockers. We were probably not affectionately called the sales prevention team, right? Like, oh, you have to go to them and everything's going to be no or so difficult. And so we really tried to flip and like, what is the value that we're bringing? And so now it's not no, we can't do this. It's how do we make that happen? So we're really advisors to our business teams of, okay, this is not a great, paragraph that we have in this contract. This is what it means, but maybe we could flip it a little bit and still make it so that the customer thinks they're getting what they want, but it's acceptable to us too. So we're really advisors, and we bring in all the functional teams as we need to make sure we get a good balanced agreement for both parties.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate that. It sounds like the journey started a while ago and you've got some time yet ahead of you. So I'll be very interested to hear your feedback as we go down this path. Michael, I'll turn to you. I'll restate the question, basically talking about your growth journey, where you've started and where you are today as an organization.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. And appreciate it, as Maria said as well, to be on this panel this morning with both Maria and Kirk. So thank you for the invite. It's interesting the way where we sit currently is I'm in procurement. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not in the legal department, but the way that contracts work within J&J for our suppliers, they sit within procurement. Now, this journey has roots in about 10 years ago or so. When you look at Johnson & Johnson as a company, we're very decentralized. We're a company of over 250 independent operating companies where we value that decentral activity and ability to act quickly and act fast. But about 10 years ago, a journey started with J&J to look at certain functions to see that they could be better, to have them be more centralized, to have them be a shared service type of model where procurement was identified as one of those functions where you could really leverage and understand the different suppliers, the different groups across our med tech, our pharma, and our consumer healthcare brands to really leverage that power and bring it together. Previous to this journey, you could sit in consumer healthcare as a sourcing individual, and the way you negotiate and work with and put a contract together would be very different than somebody that sat in the pharma group. And so this journey started about 10 years ago and launched about 5 or 6 years ago, where as we look at contracting that was brought under the procurement umbrella. And what I mean by that is you have sourcing, you have our sourcing team that's going out, that's finding the bids, that's finding our preferred suppliers, that's doing that work. And then you have a contracting organization that sits within procurement that is doing the legal T's and C's of a contract, that's supporting sourcing and what needs to get done in order to move a contract forward. So we sit outside of the law department within the procurement organization, but we have very close relationship with the law department. We have dedicated law colleagues that they support our procurement contracts, that if our individual, what we call our contract champions, aren't able to, need to go to a law department colleague, they've got identified specific people that support their type of work that they can escalate to and they can work with in order to resolve a red line or to understand why certain language is required versus other language and whatnot. And that's been pretty powerful, is to have that be in the procurement organization to really help us build up that network to where in North America we have close to 35 contract champions, plus we have a whole separate outsource partner that we work with as well to support our volume and our work there. And that will continue to grow. We'll continue to evolve. Mark, you talked through the technology piece of it, bringing things together. That's our roadmap, to continue to grow that technology and continue to move forward the contracting process as we do more strategic work in the future.
Just a quick question for clarity for my sake, Michael. You talked about the centralization and the 250 entities and the shared service. Is all of that now, all 250 entities managed via this centralized contracting group, or do you still have some decentralization?
We still have some decentralization. There are pockets where there are certain groups where we're working to, but when you look at most of our supplier spend, when you talk about North America, the vast majority is managed by that group. There are some outliers, some groups here and there, but for the majority of North America, they are managed by, when we talk about supplier spend, working directly with our suppliers.
All right, I'd like to invite Kirk into the conversation. Thank you, Maria and Michael, for kicking us off and setting the context for your organizations. I appreciate that. Kirk, Michael mentioned shared services also. I'm sure that rings true to you. You're the attorney in the group. So as a consultant, I'd like to ask you how you manage to gather and incorporate really the myriad of groups that need to be involved in the contract process.
Yeah, thank you for the excellent question, Mark. As we've heard from Maria and Michael, every business is structured differently and has unique challenges in working cross-functionally based on the history of the company and the personalities that have shaped and driven the contracting process up to the point where we are brought in as a consulting partner. In order to reduce the silos that may have developed in a company, we found that two things are really crucial. The first is to develop a vision that all the stakeholders can agree on. And that may sound a bit hokey, but it's crucial that leadership and all the relevant business units have a common reference point for what they would like their contracting process to achieve and how it can add the most value to the business. This vision becomes the North Star that everyone can come back to as they discuss technology options or processes. Does it help to achieve the vision that we've established? The second, from our perspective, is a collaborative platform that really encourages transparency. There are so many technical solutions out there now that it's hard to highlight all of the advantages that they can offer to improving the end-to-end contracting cycle. But the main thing is that they all offer an open and unified location for the key contracting activities. So this allows for your finance and logistics people to see the same documents, obligations, and terms of a contract that the legal team does. It automatically eliminates a large percentage of the information siloing that exists in the legacy system and dramatically helps to improve cross-functional collaboration. So that's our perspective from a consulting angle.
Well, I appreciate that. And the hokiness aside, I heard both Maria and Michael in their opening speak about vision. So it's reality. Clearly, it's reality. I'll turn back to Maria, and I'm not going to limit this to you, just Maria. Michael, we'll ask you the same question again also. If you can just focus on the procurement side, how do you balance your legal priorities with your business needs then, Maria?
Yeah, so DHL is a very operationally driven company. That's what we do. We're all about operations and operating for our customers. And so that is very key. And as I mentioned, we're kind of here as advisors. So while there may be quote unquote legal priorities, our legal priorities always align with the business. We have our strategy for the entire business, and we, as I said, are here to support. And I should mention, we used to report to finance, now we report to legal. So it's very easy for us to align with legal because we're all part of the same team, but really we are part of the business team. We're just an extension of them. We work very closely with our sales team. So whatever their priorities are of what kind of customers or services we're going after, like we have to be aligned with that, or else we're not going to be able to support them in a good way. So I'd say for us, it's fairly easy to balance because we are all kind of rowing in the same direction. Like you said, the same vision and the same strategy.
And like you said, organizationally, you're aligned reporting into legal as well. So that certainly eliminates a little bit of that banter that might be traditional between the groups. At J&J, Michael, how's that working? How do you balance your legal and business needs there?
Yeah, it's an interesting balance when you look at the business, procurement, and legal. I kind of look at quality, efficiency, and speed. Our legal department, they want to make sure there's good quality contracts, good quality terms. Our business, they just want to get the contract done as quickly as possible. So they're all about speed. And in procurement, we're about efficiency. We really are. We obviously want to have quality. We want to do it quickly as well. We want to be efficient in our processes, so we're not quote reinventing the wheel every single time, right? And so it's really balancing that expectation between the three groups, between the three parties. And so it really is working closely with legal We have very close forums, meetings, connections, opportunities for us to really look at what's the future of contracting. Where can we get more focused on risk-based contracting is a big focus, and understanding that not every single transaction needs a contract. Where are we okay with risk in certain areas? And we've been able to, over that journey, understand where that touch point is, where that break point is, so that we can move forward, or we can even introduce ways to not necessarily have to have a legal person or a contracting person touch a contract, but it still can get out the door in a certain way, an automated way. Additionally, it's really helping the business also understand, okay, if you understand the needs for a contract, you understand why a contract is needed, you understand the risk of your purchase, you need to be able to bring procurement into that conversation early enough so that you don't see us as a hurdle or the contract as an obstacle to overcome. And that's been a critical piece is in this journey is bringing procurement in at the very beginning, and not just think at the very end, oh, I need a purchase order, I'm going to throw it over to procurement. And so by doing that, then we're able to build into the project plan what is needed to get that contract done. And so as you balance that with the business and their need for speed, you balance the quality need with the law department and our need in procurement for efficiency. It's not easy, but it really is kind of, I like what Maria said, getting everyone rowing together in the same direction. It's having those regular communication and being very open and understanding not just, hey, bring us in early in this one contract, but understand the strategy, understand what's coming in the business over the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months. So we can be prepared and we can understand and we can really get our teams ready in a way to support the business. Because at the end of the day, like Maria said, it is about growing the business. It is about that strategy and that vision that we're here to support. We're a support function in procurement, and we want to make sure that we're doing those things that will allow the business to continue to grow and meet our goals as an overall company.
You know, what's ringing true to me as both of you are speaking is also what's important is relationships. And these are interpersonal relationships amongst the functional areas. At DHL, Maria's reporting in the legal. I think the audience might be interested to know, Michael, who you all report into organizationally.
Yeah, we report up into finance is where procurement reports up. Well, I should say our shared services where contracting sits reports up into finance.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah. So both models work, and you keep going back to QES, right? Quality, efficiency, and speed. Maria's also alluded to that. I think that's a theme that we're going to hear throughout the day here. Kirk, you know, with that as backdrop, in your experience, then what would you say drives cross-functional collaboration?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's a crucial question, and of course, the lawyer in me wants to say that, of course, it's the legal office that's driving this, but I think based upon what Maria and Michael have both pointed out, that isn't generally the case. Quite frankly, the most important driver of cross-functional collaboration is an unflinching support of the vision and the process by leadership, whoever that leadership may be. So improving cross-functional collaboration is a change process, right? And like any change management, it's only going to be successful if leadership is supportive of the improvement from initial stages and well after implementation. They need to be driving this, and they need to get everyone to come along with them. So if that leadership commitment is not there, people will start to fall back into their previous silos, right? If they are offered an improved platform, it doesn't mean that they will use it. They will continue to slip into old habits of information hoarding and working with a cluster of business units with which they are most used to dealing. It's just human nature. So strong leadership is necessary to combat this inertia or backsliding, and the change requires constant sponsorship, a reminder of the vision that was established at the beginning of the process, and a reminder to everyone on the return on investment and improved productivity that comes with adopting an improved cross-functional process. It's not an easy sell sometimes, but it's definitely worth the wait once it starts to work.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. I would totally agree with that. When we started, it's all of our signatories who are our presidents of our business units. They know they should not sign an agreement unless it comes through our team. So our team is sort of the stopgap, making sure that everyone was involved. We all agree to it before it goes to them for signature. And if without their support, like, it wouldn't work. If they're signing things on their own, then of course that's the easy way to do it. Just go directly to them and not, engage us because we're, asking questions and doing other things. So I do think that's very, very critical that you have the support of management in what we're doing.
In my career, I used to say, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who said it, so I'm not taking credit for it, but you got to get the board on board. And that board can be presidents, as it is in DHL. A board could be truly a board of directors, or it could be a management team. But whatever the definition of board is, you do need that leadership. Kirk, I appreciate you raising that. I'm going to remind the audience, because we do have a few curated questions we're asking the panel. But I'll also remind the audience to use the chat box to go ahead and ask any questions you might have. We're fast approaching that point where we will turn to your questions, so feel free to submit those. Maria, you had the floor there for a minute. I'm going to stay with you. Okay, so maybe you could speak to your insights on some of the most critical areas that DHL deploys when you're reviewing a contract.
Yeah, so I think Michael mentioned this a little bit too, right? We should look at it from a risk perspective. Like every single word in the contract maybe doesn't have the same level of risk as other ones. So sorry for the lawyers out there that I'm saying that too. But yeah, so we have like what we call our commercial expectations, which are, a handful of topics of this is our preferred position. This is what we should go for. And so we know that, and there's always the ones that are critical, or the ones that come up all the time, which are, just to list a few, like liabilities. I'm sure this is in every contract, right? Liabilities are the most important. What are we agreeing to? What are the damages? All that stuff. The second most one, I think, is rate reviews, because if you think about it, we're pricing an operation to run a warehouse for a customer. Those can be very, very complex, and it's all based on the information we get from our customer. So we priced it based on that, but if that's not the reality, then we can be in a real upside down area. So we have to be able to have the ability to review pricing and things like that. And so it's funny, when I was thinking about this question, I'm part of the World CC, World Commerce and Contracting, and they do a survey every year of like, what are the most negotiated terms versus where are the most issues, and they don't match, right? Everyone always negotiates liability, damages, all this stuff, and all the issues, and we see this too, is commercial. It's pricing, it's scope, it's some things like that. So it's very interesting of trying to shift like, what is the most important, and where do we see our issues, and let's focus on that. And if this other piece never comes up, like, why are we spending a bunch of time negotiating it when it's not going to happen? So that definitely is an evolution too. Michael, I think you mentioned aligning with your legal team. We do quarterly meetings where we talk about topics in our contracts, where we say, hey, we've had a bunch of customers come back on this topic and we seem to keep going away from our standard. Should we actually change our standard? Because why are we having that if we keep giving it up all the time? So it's very, very entertaining debates that we have, but it's that continuous improvement of what's really important and what do we need to focus on.
To me, it sounds a little bit like functional areas might have a difference of opinion on what's important. Maybe risk mitigation is important to the legal team, but that scope issue and the business commercials are important to the business team. I don't know, Kirk and Michael, if either of you want to comment from your perspective on that, but that's what I'm hearing, and I think this is an age-old problem.
Yeah, I would just agree with what Maria said about that, because as you look at, and when we look at those areas that get negotiated very often, right, the liabilities and some of those things that Maria mentioned, and I'll go out on a limb here, the chance of something like that actually coming back to haunt you or bite you is very slim, right? We still want to protect against it. We still want to be conservative. But then when you look at the scope of work, when you look at the business terms, if those aren't clearly defined and you get something delivered to you that wasn't what the business was expecting and it's what the supplier gave you, that's when you can run into issues. And so it's critical. In our contracting organization, we don't negotiate the business terms. That's done by sourcing, right? And so when we receive business terms from sourcing, a lot of times those business terms will drive what our contracting terms will be. We need to make sure they're very clear. And so there's a connection there with sourcing that if we don't have clarity around the business terms, if we don't understand the scope or what's being delivered, we have to push back and understand that better, because that is where you're going to find that more potential conflicting down the road if things don't match up with the expectation of the business versus what was actually delivered.
Yeah, it's dollars and cents, and sometimes we spend a lot of time negotiating the details of force majeure, right? So, I get you. Michael, let's stay.
Maybe I can jump in on this one, Mark,
Yeah.
because it's an interesting perspective. In law school, they refer to something called the parade of horribles, right? All of the things that could go wrong. And that is how lawyers are trained to think. Where is the most obscure risk, and have you accounted for it? And this, to my perspective, is the great advantage of having a contract management system and a shared platform, because you force everyone to essentially educate themselves with the other person's perspective. Your business people learn how the lawyers think, and your lawyers learn how the business people think, so that when you create, for example, new templates or processes, everyone's had a chance to input, but the final product should be serving both masters and the overarching needs of the company, and not just one division or one section. So another reason to engage in this sort of change management and embrace a shared platform like that is it does force everyone to come to the table together, as Maria noted, meeting with the legal people, meeting with the finance people to clarify these issues, to use the same language, and to really come together and say, all right, what is really relevant for our sector, for our company? And I think it's a great forcing function to use this type of platform.
Yeah, so now you're incorporating the technology piece, which I think is really critical. And I want to come back to Michael here for a second. Michael, you seem very open, as do all the panelists, but I'm going to ask you if you could talk about an example maybe where a contract management process that wasn't really done correctly, and the measures that you went under to remediate the process. And I'm not picking on J&J. Certainly, you don't even have to mention any particulars, but maybe just the process would be interesting and what you did to fix.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I'm happy to give an example here. Part of our, as I mentioned, the journey at the very beginning of the contracting organization and kind of understanding and bringing things together under a shared services model was really understanding our compliance versus non-compliance. How many of our things are being negotiated properly, are using proper contracts, are being signed by the right signatory, all those different things. And so when we very first started the process, we went from a place of this much non-compliance to where it's in a much better place 6 years later. And one of the most common non-compliance that we've seen over the years, and that we've really worked to address, is starting work without a contract, starting work without a purchase agreement. And so that right there is one of the things where someone thinks, or the business might think, oh, let's get things going and we'll worry about the purchase order later. It's very clear policy at J&J that we don't start work without a purchase order, and a lot of times you might have to back that out and understand, oh, I actually need a contract as well. So there was a recent experience. We don't see this as much as we used to, given where we've come on our 5-6 year journey, but there was a recent experience where we had that very exact situation where we learned actually from the legal department that work had started without a contract. And so we jumped on, and really our process when we find out something like that is happening is just to pull together different parties and to pull it together on a call and understand, hey, what happened here was this, and really I want to separate it, right? There's two things that happen. One is, what are we going to do right away to remediate it? And then two is, what can we do looking back? What was the miss here, right? And so very often that first, we'll worry about the miss later because we want to make sure we remediate it and we're not getting ourselves caught up in both work streams, so to say. So in this situation, got on the phone, tried to understand what had happened and what we could do. We found out that if our current area, our current scope for what we do as a contracting organization, we would need to negotiate a lengthy one-time agreement potentially with the supplier. But as we looked into, Kirk mentioned and Maria's mentioned, like our contracting database and the technology here, we're able actually to find that we had an MSA in place with them through a different contracting organization, not necessarily through ours that does the supplier ones, but another group that does a different type of contracts, where we reached out to them, we partnered with both legal sides, and we said, hey, this is a situation we feel like we could leverage this MSA in order to put together a work order. We talked about what things we might need to add in the work order, some things we might need to improve in order for it to meet our needs, and we got it done in about a week, right? As opposed to a lengthy, 2 to 3 month potential negotiation of a one-time agreement. So that was the power of the technology piece of it, having contracts in a centralized system. And then as we went back and we talked about the lessons learned and what happened there, it was an opportunity for us to educate this business group. They were recently brought into our process in the last year or two, and some of the new people in there hadn't been aware of what the process was. So again, it's that continuous communication, education of what our processes are and what the value is. That had they followed the process and brought in procurement at the beginning of the stages, we would have not had to worry about this, 2 to 3 week, escalation type of thing that could have put their project at risk. So again, it was that bringing us in sooner, as opposed to thinking that we're an afterthought when it comes to the purchase order or the contract with procurement.
Yeah, I hear the technology solution was valuable there, and I hear training is valuable there. Were you able, after the fact, to get the genie back in the bottle? In other words, to get the vendor or customer, whoever you were contracted with, to perform how J&J wanted them to perform contractually, or was that too late?
No, it hadn't been too late in the process. That the work had just barely kicked off, and so we were able to really bring that all back into scope. The fact that we had a previously negotiated MSA was very helpful. But to your point, sometimes it can be difficult, if that wasn't the situation, to then find yourself negotiating against yourself, right? If you've already agreed to certain things without a contract, and then to have to kind of go backwards, that's where you get yourself into trouble, where it can be difficult when you've given up your leverage potentially because you've already started work.
Sure. Maria, excuse me, you talked about already your leadership meetings, your quarterly leadership meetings, which I think are phenomenal to have a cadence cross-functionally. But what steps, in addition to that, might you recommend to improve cross-functional collaboration? And Michael, Kirk, I'll ask you to think about that as well in case you want to add into it.
Sure. Yeah, I think I kind of alluded to a little bit already, but it's a constant review, right? Like nothing is static. So, we're getting into more and more types of services where regulatory and quality and other functions are becoming more important, like our compliance function and different things. So it's really now trying to look at, okay, well, do we have all the right stakeholders now? And, as we are evolving our business, I need to involve our process as well, and who we're including, as well as what I talked about before, just the actual language and what we're doing, because things change, right? Like a good example is inflation's been really, really high, and it's really affected us. That's never really been an issue for us in North America before, and now it is. So we need to look at our language and work with our finance team on what do we need to include in our contracts. So I just think it's a constant involvement, and just how our business evolves and making sure we're staying on top of it.
Okay, thank you. Michael, Kirk, anything you might want to add that we haven't chatted about on improving cross-functional collaboration?
Yeah, one thing we've really done from a tactical level within our contracting organization, there's 2 things we've done. Is we have specific PPOCs, primary point of contacts, within our group that are responsible and work very closely with the different risk management groups. They work with risk, IP, data safeguards, insurance. That those are parts of the contract that could get redlined, that could have some feedback, and so they work very closely with them to identify how we can improve our relationship and our process of, if we need to reach out to those groups, what does that look like, right? So it's very important to have those specific one-on-one relationships. The other piece of it from a tactical standpoint that we've tried in recent months, last 6 or 9 months, and we've done this in a few areas, is almost like a project management approach. When we get a pretty big contract that we want to negotiate, we'll have a kickoff meeting between even all the business partners, all the different risk management groups that might have some input to it, and kind of lay out so the business understands this is what it's going to take to get this contract done. These are all the parties involved. If we hit any hiccups or the supplier pushes back with a lot of red lines, we're going to need your help. And if we hit hiccups here, this is what the delay could be. And so it might still be a long, lengthy process, but now the business partner is bought in. They understand what it takes, and they're okay with that because we're communicating with them, and they're even helping us. They're pushing the supplier. They're doing things to help move that along. And we found success with it. In some cases, yeah, our cycle time might have improved because of other cases. It's still very lengthy negotiation, but the business is right there with us, and they have a better appreciation for what it takes to negotiate a contract. We found that's pretty helpful to bring them in and then bring them along the journey throughout that process.
Thank you. I mean, I'm going to turn to Kirk because I'm hearing both from DHL and J&J, their perspectives. Kirk, as an audience, let me remind you, the audience, that Kirk's coming from a little bit different perspective. At Next Time, he's a third-party support for organizations that might want to have some help with their contract management. So Kirk, from your perspective then, how do you build successful collaboration within the contract management approach?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think Maria and Michael have already identified a few things that we normally have to work with clients on. One is making sure that everyone gets involved in a timely manner. The last thing you want to do is to approach your legal office after you've signed a contract. That's usually not a good time to do that. And we often have to fight the habit of empire building that we see in siloed organizations where someone feels that the solution to their problem is to build their group, when in reality the friction point or the bottleneck is somewhere else. And we find that having these platforms around to force people to collaborate and look at things holistically are extremely important. So there are a lot of moving parts in contracting with every company. So when we start working with clients, they usually identify for us a few major groups that need to be involved in the contracting process end to end. But the list keeps growing, right, as you engage in deeper analysis. Right now, force majeure may have been something that nobody really thought about a couple of years ago, and then the pandemic hit, and suddenly everyone wants to know, who's my force majeure expert, and what does it mean for me? And there are a lot of different moving pieces and obligations that touch on different parts of the business, and it can be easy to overlook, an office in Denver or an overseas business unit that's got completely different obligations. If they have GDPR obligations and you aren't thinking about that, it's a problem. So what we usually recommend is when we're starting on a new process with people is that they produce a stakeholder map early and circulate it to everyone while we're consulting on the contracting system. Because what we find is that having that in front of the leadership group is, as they discuss things, more and more parties are added to the stakeholder list, which helps to ensure that when you actually sit down and design a process and are looking at the technology to assist in that process, you really have much greater participation. And so when the templates are produced and new procedures are actually considered, everyone is at the table. So that's really important to ensure that all the appropriate parties are engaged.
All right, thank you. That's interesting. I'm going to turn now to some audience questions. We do have a few, and I'll remind the audience to go ahead and use the chat box if you'd like to submit. I will not identify the asker just because I don't have permission to do so. So here's a question that came through. We'll throw it out to the panel, and it seems a little bit tactical, actually. The question is it a strategy of negotiation to include something, excuse me, to include something that you could give back if you had to, in order to make the other party feel that they've won something? So this is, a win-lose kind of negotiation, it sounds like. Not everybody gets what they want in a negotiation. So do you guys have any comments that you want to share with the audience on that topic?
I can start. We try to take the approach of, it's a relationship, right? We're an extension of a customer's business. So we're a party to them. So we typically don't like the tit for tat, right? It's like, hey, we're just trying to look at this together. But I will say, sometimes that strategy does work, and it's understanding the people on the other side too. Like, we can tell right away how the negotiation is going to go based on the first call, right? Or the first meeting, where what are they talking about? What's their demeanor? How's their approach? And some customers we deal with do have that, like, well, I gave up 3 things, you haven't given up anything. And so if we know that ahead of time, we can change our approach to sort of, I'm going to say match that, but just to make them feel that they're getting something, but that's not our typical approach of how we would want to do it.
So you're speaking more of a partnership model than a supplier vendor model.
Yeah. Yes, that's what we strive for, because that's actually how we keep our business too, right? Like we're running, you know, these warehouses and doing transportation, packaging and stuff for all of our customers, and if we don't really have that relationship, it's not going to be a good long-standing partnership.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't have anything more to add. I think we have a similar approach where it's more about the long-standing relationship. But to Maria's point, you can tell what the negotiation is going to be up front on the first call, especially if it's a supplier maybe we haven't worked with previously, and so you could adjust potentially, right? But just similar feedback and thoughts that Maria shared.
Yeah, and
right.
Mark, I'll just add this because I think anyone who's been trained in the current model, which is, let's say, from the Harvard program of negotiation or anything like that, does believe in expanding the pie and being collaborative, but cross-culturally, it's extremely important to note that there are certain cultures that are more than happy to take and feel zero obligation to give back. It is in their cultural DNA, so to speak. And so when I work with companies or worked previously with companies as a consultant on negotiations, that's one of the things that I put out there is always be aware of where your negotiation partner is coming from, because it may be that they are absolutely happy to work collaboratively with you, but there are others that look at this as a competition. And if you engage in this sort of tit for tat thing, they will take the tit and leave the tat, and you will be very unhappy as you get to the end of this negotiation process because you will have no space to get that joint win that you were looking for. So it's a fascinating area of research, and yeah, we can talk about it all day, but I know we have other issues to get into, so I'll leave it.
It is fascinating. I've got one here. I'll adjust also to the panel. How do you ensure that, and I think we've touched on some of this, but how do you ensure that all appropriate parties are engaged? And I'm going to merge a couple questions here, so keep that in mind. Another audience question talking about engagement is, how do you also prevent some potential stakeholders from sharing too much with the other party, and therefore undercutting perhaps your leverage? So, you know, you got to always be aware to whom you're speaking and what you're sharing and where that can come back. So maybe we could all just kind of chat about that for a little bit.
Yeah, I'll start again. So I think when you said the second part of the question, I'm thinking about like kicking someone under the table of like, shut up, like, what are you saying? That is a legitimate question. We try to do, like, we always have a pre-meeting, like before we go in to a customer meeting or a customer call, and make sure everyone's aligned on what we're going to say. We also try to say, okay, who's speaking, right? A lot of times our group will take the lead, and we'll start, and then we'll call on the different subject matter experts that are in the room. Or maybe our salesperson that does, but try to align, especially on a very like large, difficult negotiation. We have to have our ducks in a row, or else we're just going to get eaten up, right? So it's really preparing and making sure. And then, I mean, I've been in ones where someone says something and you're like, oh no, like, and then you try to backtrack like in a nice way without calling them out in front of everyone, but, you know, trying to be, well, I understand what they said, but, you know, we're really trying to look at this, or trying to do it in a nice way. But I think that the whole thing is preparation and making sure everyone understands what we want to go in with, and who should be talking, and what we're going to do.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, it goes back to some of the things I talked about having engagement early on by having some sort of a business alignment meeting, understanding, even before you're talking to suppliers, just even at the beginning of a strategy build, right? And making sure all parties that are needed to be in there are involved. And then as you work throughout the process, having that pre-alignment and very similar to what Maria said, is if you're in those meetings, those calls, you have somebody from the J&J side that is leading the discussion and is calling on people, right? So no one's speaking out of turn, but it's being managed in an appropriate way. And again, it all comes to preparation and pre-alignment, that if you don't have that pre-alignment engagement on what are the critical things that we're looking for and what success looks like, and we're aligned internally, then that's when I think you see some of those situations happen where you might have some things shared that shouldn't have been shared, or blurted out, right? If you don't have that pre-aligned on what is important, right? So
we always say too, we try to teach, like, sometimes silence is best. Like, don't keep talking.
exactly.
You know, like, if you've said your point, stop, and then wait for them to say something. Don't just keep talking, because now you're going to dig yourself in a hole. So it's like, stop it.
Silence can be one of your best negotiators.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm glad we're not practicing that here in this webinar.
Yeah, and
I appreciate you going. Go ahead,
let me
Kurt.
just offer a different perspective. So as the consulting organization, what we try and encourage people to do is to get out of negotiations entirely. I mean, there's no need for you to spend time in negotiations if you can create a mutually acceptable template agreement up front. And that's where we can save folks the most money, I think, and time, is to create a process by which they are out of the negotiation business, because it is time consuming and aggravating at times to have to go to negotiations, especially with regular partners that you do business with on a constant basis. It should be possible to find a master service agreement or some sort of template where you can say, hey, we're offering everyone the same terms and conditions. Let's just go with this. And some of the industries are now moving that way. In the pharmaceutical industry, for example, I used to work at Northwestern University. They had a sort of industry standard that they'd agreed on in conjunction with universities, and they tried to get everyone just to use that. That was always the first question: are you willing to use that template? Because guess what? Then we're done negotiating and we can just move on to business. The other thing that's really fascinating nowadays is the development of technology where low-level negotiations are being done by AI. And I find it really fascinating that they've essentially presented a lot of folks that are doing these easier agreements with sort of a choose your own adventure type format. So it's like, yes, we can give you New York as your location for, you know, the controlling law, but then you're not going to touch anything else. Or you can choose that you want 10 years of confidentiality, but then you accept our liability clauses. And they just force the negotiation partner to do this through AI without having to have human interaction. And I think that's really fascinating as we move forward to see how much of that will free up the time of you know, high-level people like Maria and Michael to do more important stuff than be involved in these negotiations, which are very time-consuming.
Thank you. I have one last question, and I know we've touched on some of this, but I'll give everybody an opportunity to briefly add to it if they'd like. The question is really, how do you deal with competing priorities from the different functions? So we've had a lot of discussion on that, but if anybody would like to add to that, feel free.
I don't know that I have much to add. I mean, I think it's just understanding everyone's perspective, and then either, you know, whoever, we're making the decision of this is what we're doing, or you're escalating to a higher level person to say, okay, you know, here's finances opinion, here's ops, like you're the P&L owner, what do you want to do? Or you're the ops owner, how do you want to handle it? So I think you're always going to have that, and that's kind of the value that we bring, is to try to resolve those situations.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is you know, just understand what those priorities are and where's the impact on the contract, the procurement process, or whatnot. But to understand, at the end of the day, we're supporting the business, and Maria said it, you know, the PL owner, right, type of thing. And so understanding what the priority is, and then how you can build that into your process or into your negotiation, whatever the case might be. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure the business can move forward, but they're moving forward in a protected way that allows them to grow in the best way possible.
Yeah, and Mark, I'll just add this, which is to go back to my talking point about the importance of vision here again, because having a well thought out and articulated vision guiding the contracting process or any system change is extremely helpful in minimizing the competition between priorities. It takes transparent and fair leadership to be 100% successful, but if they can judge any conflict between the business units by referring back to the vision, everyone will feel that decisions are being made in a consistent manner in support of the group's goals, and that there's no favoritism, and that the decision was made really for the overall benefit of the business.
Sure. You know, as we near the top of the hour, I like that we came back to vision, because that's where Maria and Michael started. And it just seems like it's an appropriate way to close. And I'll ask each of you really if you want to leave the audience with any closing remarks. We have a few moments. Maybe Maria, Michael, Kirk, in that order. If you have anything you want to leave, we'll finish up and thank everybody.
Sure. Well, you kind of said what I was going to say at the end there. Just basically, you know, it's our role is to drive the business, and so whatever we can do to help support, that's our role, and that includes, right, all the cross collaboration, because it's not one person's role to do a bunch of things, right, or to understand the entire piece of the contract, but that's our role to make sure that everyone is being heard, and that we address all concerns as best we can. And I'll go back to, you know, just making sure that, you know, everyone in the organization understands that, because if they don't, or it's not sort of the rule or how you're going to be working, it'll never work. So you have to have the support to make sure that people are doing what the vision is and what a company wants to go for.
Michael,
Yeah.
the podium.
Yeah, and I do want to go back to vision as well. We have a very clear vision, and it's actually a vision for contracting on what our purpose is, and that vision was aligned with the law department and was reviewed with them and discussed with them, and then it's something that how we execute against it is and in that vision we talk about, you know, supporting the business, growing the business, risk-based contracting, all those different elements of how we're going to make it happen and execute against it. And so when we go out and we have sessions with the law department, or we meet with the business, or we help them understand the role we play in getting a contract done, or what the future of contracting looks like, it all starts back with the vision of what we're trying to get, so they can understand where we're headed. It's not just, you know, obviously today's contract is very important for them and that business unit, but as you look forward the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, where we're evolving is even more important for us to understand that and to get that vision around it, and then expectations and what we're doing becomes a little bit more clear, and you can all, what Maria said at the beginning, get everyone rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, and from my side, Mark, let me just thank you, Maria and Michael, for a really interesting discussion. Learned a tremendous amount myself about this topic, and appreciated hearing the war stories and insights about how they've improved cross-functionality in their companies. My final point is simply this: don't be afraid to embrace change in this area. The return on investment with improved cross-functionality is extremely high, and your customers and stakeholders will appreciate an improved process as well. And if you aren't sure how to approach the subject, I'm sure the pointers from the panelists were very helpful in getting you headed in the right direction. But of course, outside consultants can help as well. Sometimes having an objective third party come in to assist with the process can help to overcome inertia and inspire change. Main thing is, just don't hesitate to get started in the process, because it is really worthwhile journey to take.
Well, thank you guys, all of you. I am sure that the insights provided the audience really with some interesting perspective, as Kirk just mentioned, and I hope they'll take that and be able to use that in evaluating their own contract management strategy. So, you know, I'd like to wrap up by extending a really heartfelt thank you to everybody, to our listeners, literally from across the world. If I read you the list of countries here, you all would be impressed. Thank you for joining us. To our panelists, Maria, Michael, Kirk, and your respective organizations, DHL, J&J, and Next Time, for participating. To Mondak, really for helping to organize this webinar. And to my colleagues and team back at Next Time, who've been working tirelessly behind the scenes to continually make these events very successful. We do invite all of our listeners to connect with Next Time and to discuss how we can work hand in hand with you and your organization. If you do have any questions in line with the discussion today that we were unable to address due to time constraints, we do welcome that you reach out to us at thinknext@nextime.com, and our team's going to be very happy to respond offline. Across the globe, we think next at Next Time, and we invite you to do the same. We welcome your feedback on today's presentation. Be vigilant and stay safe. Thank you and goodbye. Michael, Kirk, Maria, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.